Hello, it's me again. And after the recent release of my second short film project, I thought it'd be worth trying to make this sort of tutorial video on the method that I used. I was thinking it might give some people a bit of inspiration, or so you can kind of give it a go yourself. The method I've used for Alone at Freddy's, I wouldn't really call it proper animation per se. It's kind of like taking a detailed storyboard and making kind of a more drawn and polished version of it. And then you go and you add in your audio and stuff. It's a lot closer to making an animatic than making something that's fully animated. I will mostly be using Alone at Freddy's for this explanation, but there is a lot of stuff from the Slade pilot that I feel like is worth bringing up, so that will come up where it's applicable. Alright, so first of all, a couple of important things to go over regarding the method I've used, which I'll list as sort of pros and cons. In terms of the software, there's a lot of options because all you need is a video creation and editing program, like an audio recorder, an audio editing program. And even then, audio editing is specifically if you're making your own sound effects, voice work, and all that. And thirdly, kind of the important bit is your drawing software needs to be able to use layers. That's the main important bit. Yeah, for all of my project work, I've been using the Adobe Creative Cloud, but if you do some looking around, there are a ton of options for each of these things that are available, and I think a fair few of them are either very cheap or if they're not free outright. The next one is you don't need to have super advanced animation skills, as you're not making a full animation. And kind of all the kind of extra work and sort of technical stuff that implies. I will say that having a very basic knowledge of it does help, but if you ever read comics or manga, that should be a good place to sort of go off of. Or even to be fair, if you watch a lot of films and stuff, there should be a good place to sort of start. A lot of the stuff you can do with the method is highly customizable, such as the whole thing with the Slade pilot was me seeing how it would look with more kind of deliberate comic book elements, the individual panels and speech bubbles. Yeah, which gives the Slade pilot a very different feeling to Alone at Freddy's, which I guess is more traditional. Okay, there's actually a lot of contributing factors to what makes Slade feel different from Alone at Freddy's, but I feel like that's kind of more in the art style and the source material. On the other hand, though, the main con is that it is really time consuming. And I'm gonna say, as someone who kinda has a background in webcomics and did do animation in uni, then one of the hardest parts of creating this kind of narrative media is it takes a lot of work, and it takes a very long time to kind of get the full final product, if you will. Just to kind of give the scope of each of the projects, Alone at Freddy's effectively has 171 individual frames. And almost all of them, except for the looping rain cycles at the beginning, have new individual drawings. And Slade has about 150. Yeah, with both of these being about an average of 5 minutes long. And each of these projects did take about 6 months to make, if I kind of average it out together. And this was actually the main contributing factor to my decision when it comes to Slade, in that if I continue it, it is gonna be done as a normal webcomic, which will probably be hosted on it'll probably be hosted on your typical kind of like webcomic sites, like Global Comics, maybe Tapas and Webtoon. It'll probably have a new title as well, probably something like Ryan and the Quest Crew. One thing I did think, though, as kind of a counter to that, is I feel like the Alone at Freddy's method may actually work better for creating a series of shorts of maybe like a minute or so, which I'm actually thinking of attempting to do for my next project, like in the future. And although it is a lot to do, as it is with stuff like webcomics and like, it's not actually that bad once you get into it. Really, as long as you kind of have like a sort of appropriate like schedule for it, and you kind of remember to take breaks, like don't burn yourself out, and it kind of helps if it's not like all you're doing all day, like working on like one project. Yeah, if you kind of like take a day off or two like every week to like play games or something, even if it's only kind of like a half day off, like as long as you're doing something else as well, it does help to break up the monotony. Yeah, this is something to consider if your channel is the sort that relies on kind of having like regular uploads. Like, you can make one of these projects, but you'll also probably be making other videos, like, on the side. Yeah, and another thing is, you're gonna be working with, like, a lot of files, and, depending on the kind of way you're making your individual project, some of the, like, image files might get very large if they have, like, multiple component parts to them. You really want to keep your files organized. Like, for Alone at Freddy's here, I have like a file for the audio, for the backgrounds, for again for the frames which I showed, all the stuff for the videos, and then I guess all this stuff around is the things like the character designs and the storyboards and that, and just other miscellaneous things. Yeah, just as long as you use your file folders and keep everything organized and know where everything is, again, you should be fine. And may as well mention here that definitely for any kind of big projects, it's definitely worth being able to back up your work. Like if say you get like a hard drive or like a USB or something to kind of just have an extra place to keep it in case like you have issues with your computer or whatever. That's also like a good thing to do. Yeah, so that's like the basic pros and cons of like the process, which are basically worth putting into consideration. Alright, so one of the best places to start when you're gonna sort of like tell a story of like any kind is with the script. If you have a look at the sort of scripts that are used for like screenwriting for like TV and stuff, that's kind of generally what works well. Each scene should start with like a general description of what's happening. Yeah, it's worth describing what your characters and probably what your camera is doing, as well as kind of what everyone says. It's worth listing things like characters that are present. In this example, you see a note for Sylvia's dad, who doesn't actually appear in the final version of the pilot. Yeah, another bit that's in here is with Rebecca. She was originally gonna be an orc before I like kind of retconned her into being an elf, because I decided orcs like aren't part of the Slade world. As well as having all the characters and scenes and stuff. Another thing that I added specifically for like later on is I got every character and I kind of put a note for their voice, what their voice could sound like. And then I found every line of dialogue that character has. Like, this is all Ryan's lines. And this was basically to make everything easier when I did the voice acting, like, later on. And after you've got your script, then you can move on to creating all your, like, storyboards. Here, you basically kind of visualize what your scenes are going to look like. And this will help with like very rough versions of the buildings and like very rough versions of the character designs. And you can kind of set up specific things like the panning shot at the beginning that shows the room. This has a camera direction. One thing that storyboards are very good for in particular is action and fight scenes. Because fights can be kind of unwieldy to write in like a script. Like in the Slade pilot script, I basically had a rough summary of what each character can do. But with the storyboard, I could kind of, I guess, put into pictures what stuff in the fight scene would like actually look like. And it's worth each box, particularly in Slade because it's a lot more dialogue heavy, should have a bit of like space around it that kind of puts where your voice lines are, because this will be helpful when you like edit the video. How detailed your storyboards go and how much is in there, how much information is in there, it's kind of one of them where it's down to personal preference. Like some people might kind of be able to go roughly off what's in one drawing and make multiple kind of frame drawings out of that. Whereas someone else might find it more helpful to kind of plan out every frame drawing. Yeah, another thing that I probably should have done in the Slade pilot is the Alone at Freddy's characters being color-coded, which helps if there's only like a small part of a character, like visible like Freddy's hand here. Now we're sort of getting into the bulk of the main kind of element of the project, which is like the visual like art stuff. Like there are specific details that may, from this point onwards, with the visuals, audio, and editing, there's probably going to be a couple of things that will be different depending on the software you're using. There's like often a lot of resources online for your specific software. Like there's not a lot I can say for this because I only really have experience with like the Adobe programs. So that's kind of what I'm going to be using for the demonstration. But a lot of the really basic stuff should have overlap with whatever art programs you're using. And of course, a lot of the things I am going to say in the art section, like if I mention any, might be super specific to my own projects as examples. Like, any tips I give, may not necessarily be applicable depending on how you, make your own art. Even if, anything I say about specific things like character designs, for example, doesn't really apply to you, I kind of hope it's at least gonna have value in some way. Like, it might even just kind of give you some ideas or whatever. So first of all, here's the character lineup for Alone at Freddy's. Since, Alone at Freddy's is like a fan project, there's an existing property, so we basically already have the character designs to work off, with Rachel in particular kind of being an OC, and that's it. Yeah, I guess the main part of the Alone at Freddy's character designs was essentially taking the toy animatronics and sort of giving them sort of withered versions. Because, the main premise of Alone at Freddy's was, what if these guys were uncovered after probably, 50, 60-odd years of neglect? Kind of one of the main contributors to the toy designs in this was, to essentially desaturate the color schemes was the first thing I did to kind of age them. And if I actually go under adjustments and, hue and saturation, if I turn the saturation back up, you can actually get something somewhat close to the in-game color schemes. A rough summation of what they would have been. But I did kind of start with close to the canon color schemes. And then I kind of did a lot of the stuff you do see with FNAF when it comes to scarifying their funny animal robots, where they throw in cracks, tears, they kind of put the discoloration around the legs that might be indicative of water damage. Yeah, and going back to Mangle, who is white in the original kind of material, but I've essentially taken them and sort of decolored them to sort of an off-whitish yellow, because white plastic tends to turn like that over time, and that's the same with the gloves. I also chucked some Rust on her because I think the AR game does that. It's either Help Wanted or the AR game that makes her like rusty. So I kind of like reference that. Additional like little fact here. Originally the person who comes to pick up Rachel was gonna be another OC, like a guy called Leon. I ended up using Vanessa instead just because I thought it'd be kind of fun to do. And like Vanessa's presence kind of actually puts Alone at Freddy's kind of in the timeline a bit, because her being around indicates it's about when Security Breach takes place. Like, albeit in an AU. So that's why I changed it to her. This is a lineup where we already kind of have the character designs to kind of work off of, but and if you're kind of making your own OCs and characters and stuff anyway, it is worth kind of trying to make, I guess, like a proper character sheet for each character. Again, how this is done kind of depends on personal preference. Like, some people like to do technical turnarounds, whereas I've kind of found it more helpful because these were completely new characters to kind of get like the character's equipment is one of the main things that does need its own reference, but I also really wanted to kind of set down what like the vibe of the character was, with like expressions and kind of what their abilities are, and like the action stuff could potentially be like used. Yeah, like a specific thing that does get used in the pilot episode is Evelyn using Nerogus like a bazooka, instead of kind of using him like normally. Another thing that's like definitely worth considering if you're doing comics is remember that every character you're going to be drawing over and over again. Like in Alone at Freddy's, I think there's something like 91 individual drawings of Rachel. And granted, like, not a lot of them are like her full body or anything. Yeah, and I think on the shading, her hair was like the most complicated bit of her. Don't make characters that are like a pain in the ass to draw if you're gonna make something like this, because you will end up regretting it like halfway through. Yeah, like this Rust was kind of a nightmare as well, actually, in hindsight. Like, keep it like relatively simplistic. Now that we've got our character designs, the next bit to make is the backgrounds for each of your scenes. What you want to do is essentially you want to make yourself, first of all, a preset or a file size that is 1920 by 1080 light pixels, since that's or in my case, because I'm making these videos for YouTube, that is the size that YouTube uses. And if you make the images this size, it's like you don't have to resize them all when you're doing your editing. So yeah, you create files of this size. And you want to like go to your storyboards to kind of create each of your like background shots. Like this is the folder of all the ones that I used in Alone at Freddy's. With Alone at Freddy's, I kind of would make I divided sort of the storyboard into like scenes, and then I'd make every background shot I needed. Like for the beginning, I did all these exterior shots. With most of the exterior shots I used in the first scene that I made. Then I kind of took each of these and then I did all the drawings of Rachel that are at the beginning. And then after that I moved to the scene where she goes inside. Had all the backgrounds I need to do for that. Got all the scenes of Rachel going inside and I did all the drawings, backgrounds and then character drawings, and I just kind of did it like that. And I kind of did it like that because it helps sort of break up a bit of the monotony with just constantly drawing backgrounds. Of which there's quite a lot of backgrounds, even in Alone at Freddy's, and but the thing about the way Alone at Freddy's works is that each background is kind of reusable. Like there are quite a few backgrounds that are used multiple times. So if a scene needed that background, I could open up the file again and like add additional character drawings. With Slade on the other hand, it does have individual pages, because of the way it's more like comic book-like. Each kind of page has a couple of frames attached to it. Yeah, for these Slade backgrounds in particular, they're basically kind of made so that the panels background panels are their own layer that can be like toggled on and off, which is one of the reasons why you need like a program that has layers. And this is kind of how the comic book panels in Slade work. Yeah, and you kind of pull them up when you need them. Yeah, Slade has a lot of very simplistic backgrounds because each background is unique, whereas because of the, I guess, recyclable nature of Alone at Freddy's backgrounds, even if a lot of them are only used once, I kind of went in with a lot more detail. I guess kind of one of the things with Alone at Freddy's was the sort of brokenness of everything convey with the additional kind of background details. In fact, even this is one of the first things I made for Alone at Freddy's. This kind of like asset sheet thing with like the posters and stuff on it that I could like copy and paste and then resize and reuse like each of these images in like various parts. A lot of the time I would need to retrace over them because they became more pixelated, but it was kind of easy to work off of. Another thing is like here is where these posters get used, and they are a bit pixelated admittedly. Like this particular shot is a lot bigger, like it breaks the width limitations because of the panning shot at the beginning. Yeah, essentially what I did was I'd essentially get like the character drawing plus the background kind of section that I needed, and then I'd copy and paste in kind of a file setup that was the 1920 by 1080, and I'd just copy and paste it in to make the frames. Yeah, so this bigger image kind of like gets away with it to an extent. Yeah, another thing that you can do is you can sort of like experiment with adding like foreground objects, and they again are their own layer. And with a foreground object, you can kind of have a character like walk behind it easily. I think I do use this. I do have a foreground that's like the curtain in Kid's Cove. It's like a foreground object that Rachel pulls back. Is here something for a potential future project where I took where the screen that you see is its own layer that I can sort of toggle. So I can kind of do new drawings and have different things like shown on the screen. So it's worth kind of trying different things out with your background images and seeing like what kind of results you can like get out of it. And the next bit now is to get onto our animation. Essentially, every like character should kind of have their own drawing that's on their own layer, which you can toggle using layer visibility. So you'll do like all of your like sketches, your line art colors and shading, and then you merge the line art colors and shading into one file, and then you'll name it character name and then like the number in what order it is. So this shot has like 7 different Rachel drawings, and this part of Freddy that, as I mentioned earlier, with the cutting it off in bits where I need it. This is kind of what gets your like animation kind of feeling. And this making it individual layers, also the speech bubbles and stuff like for Slade. This again is like the whole mentioning where you don't really need to be super trained in animation, but it's like it's kind of worth. Yeah, and even when characters interact, they're kind of on a separate layer. Like sometimes you can draw them as a group, whereas on like this shot is a group, and then the one after it. But once you've got the little component bits that you like need, you basically save it as like a JPEG. You kind of save it as like your frames, and then you'll name it like frame 1, frame 2, frame 3, frame 4. And that's basically how you make each of your individual images. So that when you take it into your video editor, you basically just add each image kind of in its order to get your animation. There are like little like extra bits, like you might make your thumbnail if you want to make your sort of credits, and then kind of like at the beginning kind of things like a disclaimer or a content warning. For example, the one for Alone at Freddy's here states that this is based off like kind of an established franchise, and notices for anything like flashing images. Yeah, kind of pointing out if your content is like not for kids, like, or kind of has anything that's like kind of might be like upsetting or whatever. Yeah, I'd kind of put that in just as like a common courtesy kind of thing. I mean, kids will still watch it anyway, but you know, it's kind of like a what can you do kind of thing. Going into this, audio was the area that I was admittedly the least confident about. The primary source of the music and sound effects that I used for both of my projects was YouTube's audio library, which basically has music and like a collection of music and a collection of sound effects that you can basically download and kind of use in your own videos, basically like copyright free. It even tells you for the music if you need to credit the artist. It's, from my experience, it's actually kind of decent for music. It has filters to help you kind of go for a specific mood and genre that you want. And there's some very specific music that you can get like a very specific vibe from. The sound effects, on the other hand, are a little bit more limited. There's virtually nothing in there's no like fantasy category for Slade. I kind of had to go with like what we had. Yeah, for like the magic effects and stuff. Because I don't really have the skills or resources to make my own sound effects or music, basically it did kind of work out for me. For most kind of projects, if you don't mind kind of having to get a bit inventive, it should be fine with using this. There's plenty it does have. I basically downloaded the audio samples that I liked and then, I kind of put them into the video when I was editing it. I'm not really a professional voice actor either. Back in the script section, I mentioned kind of getting all the characters' lines and putting them in at the end. For each character, I did all of their lines as kind of like its own like audio file. So here you see the individual characters' names with like voice test, which has all their lines on it. So that I could kind of get each character and then I took them into Audition to kind of do the editing. Yeah, once I had my character audio, the first thing I did was I cleared the background noise, which, again, you can find, like, tutorials on. To basically make each of the characters sound different, one of the first things I did was I changed the pitch, I believe under effects, and then time and pitch. And then I think it was pitch shifter. To add these sort of special effects to a lot of the characters' voices, like, say, the robot voices for the FNAF characters, I'd go on effects, modulation, and the chorus flanger, and to a lesser extent phaser options, where you have presets to kind of warp what the characters' voices sound like, and then how many voices there are. Again, you can find, because I can't exactly remember what I did for the FNAF characters, you can find tutorials on your audio editing software of the options for making robot voices. I think this rich chorus option with the 4 voices, in particular, I used for Neragus in Slade to kind of make him sound like a spooky demon guy. It's one of them where it's kind of worth experimenting with the different like sound options if you kind of have characters that you want to have effects on their voices. Note it's kind of worth taking into consideration how much modulation you kind of put on the characters' voices. Yeah, kind of trying to make sure you can still like understand them. Unless you have a character that's unintelligible for like a joke or something. Or that's kind of like the point. Yeah, and that's like your sound stuff. Once you've collected all of your art and audio, you basically want to pull it into your video editor. Like here I've used Adobe Premiere Pro, and this is like all the like resources. Essentially what you want to do is you want to go on your video channels and basically start like putting in the images like one by one. And as you go along, you kind of add in all your like voice clips. And having multiple voice channels kind of makes it easier to manage. In Adobe Premiere Pro, you use the razor tool to kind of cut out like the pauses and kind of like the bad takes and stuff. Yeah, if you look at your storyboards again, you kind of see when the lines of dialogue might happen. And you want the appropriate image to be on screen for the duration of your like voice clip. Yeah, and you also kind of put in your like sound effects. Your sound effects and your voice clips you kind of don't really want to overlap too much. And when you put in your music, the music you should probably sort of like lower the volume. So you want to make sure that if you have music in, it doesn't like overpower your voice lines. And for that same reason, you kind of want to mostly avoid, if you've got dialogue, avoid music that has lyrics in it, because it can make kind of parts like hard to hear. As for your timing, each image that doesn't have any dialogue or sounds added to it is kind of on the screen for about an average of 2 seconds. But when you have kind of like an establishing shot or like a scene ending shot, like what I'm going through here, it's okay to kind of have it like linger on the screen for like a bit longer to set it up for your audience, like kind of what's going on. This part's kind of tedious, but it's pretty straightforward. There are some extra couple of simple effects, again, kind of depending on the program you're using, such as the fade in and outs for like the ends of scenes and kind of having music fade in and out. Yeah, play it back like when you make each scene so the timing kind of feels right and whatever. Yeah, and once you've done that, you can like export it as as kind of whatever file type is appropriate to and settings to whatever media you're gonna, like, say you want to upload it to like YouTube or whatever. That's basically how I made Alone at Freddy's. I hope this video was at least kind of valuable in like some way, or at least, you know, interesting to watch. At some point, there's a chance that I might come back with like future projects that are like this, and maybe I'll do some kind of smaller like update things with any. Maybe if I do a couple more of these kinds of projects, I can kind of make like a revised version of this video like in the future. I guess I'll see you in a bit. Thanks for watching.